back. This is Middle Perch, right here on the internet. I'm live. I'm MTK on the MIC, and this is a track we just made. And in the previous video, I think you can see how we went about that using Music Maker Jam. And so I'm just coming back to do the rest of what we were going to do today, which is to talk about what happened in Mexico on the coast, interior coast there, Pacific-facing coast towards Baja there, in Culiacan, Mexico, Culiacan. The way we're going to approach this is we're going to read the piece out of the New York Times that covers it. Then we're going to read an analysis titled How the Sinaloa Cartel Bested the Mexican Army. And then we're going to read a piece from today's LA Times that's more analytical in nature. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a nice, complete three-person picture by writers who are knowledgeable on this. So the first person is by the name of let's see here, Ahmed. Azam Ahmed. Okay. Azam Ahmed is the bureau chief for the New York Times in Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. He was previously the Afghanistan bureau chief. That must have been pretty crazy, given that we've had war there for the last 17 years. And has also covered the world of high finance and white-collar crime for the business desk. Okay? Azam Ahmed. And this is the New York Times, so, you got to take it with a little bit of stuff that comes with that. Anyway, that track is called Floosh. You can find it on the site. Mexico City. Escape, it seems, is a trait shared in the Guzman family. So is embarrassing the government of Mexico. Joaquin Guzman Loera, the drug lord known as El Chapo, eluded the grasp of the government numerous times. In tunnels, behind closets, beneath bathtubs, and through steep ravines in the remote mountains of Sinaloa. He even managed to escape prison twice. The latest family member to escape apprehension, El Chapo's son, Ovidio Guzman Lopez, managed his own feat of government humiliation this week when cartel henchmen forced a patrol of at least 30 members of government forces to release him after he had been captured. The stunning surrender, with Mexican forces badly outmatched, taken hostage by outlaws, and forced to let loose a prominent suspect in their custody, began with a siege on the city of Culiacan on Thursday by members of the Sinaloa Cartel, once headed by El Chapo. Videos of fierce gun battles in the street, armed men blocking roads, residents fleeing to safety, and clouds of black smoke rising from burning vehicles swamped social media. Reports swirled that after the capture of the younger Mr. Guzman, his cartel mounted a fierce assault to win his freedom and prevent his extradition to the United States. But the government remained silent, asking citizens to stay indoors and avoid being in the street throughout most of the day. Later, it clarified, at least partially, saying a patrol had stumbled on Mr. Guzman, but had suspended the operation when it became outnumbered and outgunned by enemy fighters. The next morning, the truth came out, pried loose by local media. The patrol was actually a planned operation to capture Mr. Guzman and extradite him to the United States, the government acknowledged on Friday. The armed forces managed to detain him, but they were forced to let him go after 8 of their members were taken by force and held hostage, the government said. Surrounded by enemies with no clear plan for backup on ground or in the air and no clear exit strategy, the soldiers relented and gave Mr. Guzman back. Quote, and here's the president, AMLO, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, the president of Mexico. I'm going to refer to as AMLO, AMLO. Quote, decisions were made that I support, that I endorse, because the situation turned very bad and lots of citizens were at risk, lots of people, and it was decided to protect the life of the people, close quote, AMLO said in a news conference on Friday. Open quote, you cannot value the life of a delinquent more than the lives of the people, close quote. According to an American official, former American official, and another person briefed on the matter, the force behind the cartel's rapid and effective response was yet another Guzman. It was El Chapo's older son, Ivan, who has taken a prominent role in the cartel since his father was caught, extradited to the United States, and sentenced to life in prison in July on drug murder and money laundering charges. They said that Ivan was initially captured by the military as well, but that his henchmen quickly overpowered the armed forces and secured his release. Then, once free, the elder brother, Ivan, then orchestrated a staggering show of force to secure the freedom of his brother, Ovidio. The effort not only included holding soldiers hostage, but also kidnapping their families. According to the two people briefed on the matter, who were not authorized to speak publicly. Government press officers did not respond to requests for comment. The cartel's victory offered a frightening glimpse into the power wielded by organized crime in Mexico, distilling in a single 8-hour stretch the extent to which the nation is held captive by criminal networks. Without a plan to combat the scourge of violence that has brought the country to its deadliest point in decades, Mr. Ahmed writes, and by the way, he has hypertext links throughout this piece. That's one of them. Deadliest point in decades, Mexico's. It was a major loss of face for a president who has consistently waved off doubts about his security strategy, or in the eyes of critics, his lack of one. Like his predecessor, Mr. López Obrador has tried to distance himself from the violence tearing at his nation, opting instead to focus on a slate of domestic programs to target poverty. But also, like his predecessor, he may have come to a point where brushing aside such concerns proves disastrous for his presidency. For the previous president, Enrique Peña Nieto, that moment came with the disappearance of 43 students in the town of Iguala, a mystery that remains unsolved. Some wondered whether the very public overpowering of the military will become a similar turning point for Mr. López Obrador. For many, the events of Thursday unfolded as if scripted by an overzealous screenwriter, pushing the bounds of believability. Quote, no one could imagine such a bad Netflix show, close quote, said Alejandro Hope, a security analyst in Mexico City. Open quote, this combination of actually capturing the guy and then releasing him, that's new, close quote. It remained unclear how the government expected to detain a leader of one of the most powerful cartels in the world on its home turf without sufficient backup or adequate plans to extract themselves. In his news conference on Friday, Mr. López Obrador spent the majority of the time ignoring or avoiding the subject, while also dismissing criticism of the government's embarrassing defeat at the hands of organized crime. Quote, you can't fight fire with fire, AMLO said of the decision to hand Mr. Guzman back to his cartel. Quote, we do not want dead people, we do not want war, and this takes a lot to understand, close quote. Still, fighting fire with fire was, in the end, what happened. At least 7 people died, including 1 civilian, and 16 were injured, according to Mexican security officials. Mr. López Obrador's security cabinet later put much of the blame on the soldiers themselves and acknowledged the operation had been poorly planned. Public outrage has boiled over, not only at the embarrassing defeat, but also at the government's lackluster strategy to combat the lawlessness. Quote, I can summarize this as a failure from the tactical to the strategic, close quote, said Christian Ehrlich, a security expert with Riscop, a Mexican risk analysis firm. From the beginning, Mr. López Obrador has struggled to confront the nation's rising violence. After promising to remove the military from the streets where confrontations with organized crime have only increased violence, he opted instead to create a new force, the National Guard. Mexican soldiers and others were transitioned to the new team, whose mandate was unclear from the start. With the Army, Navy, and the federal police already deployed to hotspots across the country, the government has had a hard time articulating its vision for the role of the National Guard. In recent months, the new force has stumbled on its mission somewhat inadvertently in response to pressure from President Trump. Its task now largely focuses on policing the nation's borders and apprehending migrants heading through Mexico on the way to the United States. This task has drawn these forces into a new direction, apart from public security, which has left some areas with fewer resources. At the same time, homicides have hit new records each year for the last 2 years. This year is no different. The nation is on track to suffer its worst run of murders since the government began to tally them. Now, with the release of Mr. Guzman by the armed forces, the government has suffered one of the most memorable defeats in its 13-year war on drugs. The events in Culiacan come after a week that began with the killing of 13 state police officers in Michoacan and a gun battle outside of Iguala in Guerrero that left 15 dead, said Raul Benitez, a security expert at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. Quote, "What comes next?" Close quote, he said. In recent years, Mexico had grown adept at the capture of so-called kingpins, for better or worse. While the strategy has largely failed to quiet the violence, American and Mexican officials took comfort in knowing that it has succeeded in detaining and extraditing major figures. Mr. Guzman's father, El Chapo, was arrested multiple times before he was sentenced to life in prison in the United States. Leaders of the Zeta Cartel, the Gulf Cartel, and a long list of others have also been apprehended in coordinated action among law enforcement and the armed forces. But with the latest blunder, many fear the government's decision to let Mr. Guzman go under fire from the cartels will embolden them. Quote, "The government was forced to accept the cartel's control over the city and not confront them," Mr. Benitez said. Quote, "To the people of Culiacan, the president is sending a very tough message. The cartel is in charge here." Close quote. Elizabeth Malkin and Paulina Villegas contributed reporting to that piece by Mr. Ahmed in the New York Times. Now we go to a piece from Time magazine. Strangely, that's not a source I commonly use, but it's interesting because the person in question here seems to be someone who was there for a long time. Although throughout all this, you can hear that tone, can't you, of the American CIA and the American system. This is by Joan Grillo, or it could be Ioan, I-O-A-N. That should be J, right? I don't know. It's either Ioan or Joan Grillo, Grillo. Okay, and it's called "How the Sinaloa Cartel Bested the Mexican Army" by Grillo, Grillo. In Mexico's big cities, drug cartel gunmen normally act like phantoms. They hide in safe houses or amid communities, suddenly striking with an assassination or a gunfight, and then disappearing again. Residents know they are there and are scared, but most of the time they can't see them. But on Thursday, in the Sinaloan city of Culiacan, the cartel gunmen were everywhere. They openly drove in trucks with mounted machine guns, blockaded streets flashing their Kalashnikovs, and burned trucks unleashing plumes of smoke like it was a scene in Syria. They took control of the strategic points in the metro area. They took control of the strategic points in the metro area, shut down the airport, roads, and government buildings, and exchanged fire with security forces for hours, leaving at least 8 people dead. In contrast, everyone else had to act like ghosts, hiding behind locked doors, not daring to step outside. And in this unusual battle, the Sinaloa Cartel won. Their uprising was in response to soldiers storming a house on Thursday and arresting Ovidio Guzman, the 28-year-old son of convicted kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. In February, the U.S. Justice Department announced, this is February of this year, so it's like 7 months ago, the U.S. Justice Department announced it had indicted Ovidio Guzman on trafficking cocaine, marijuana, and meth. But after hours of cartel chaos, Mexico's federal government gave soldiers the go-ahead to release him. It capitulated. I've covered Mexico's drug violence for 18 years, written 2 books about the subject, and seen many extraordinary episodes. In Sinaloa, the cradle of drug traffickers, I've repeatedly been on the crime beat chasing bullet-ridden corpses and into the mountains to Guzman's opium-growing village. But Thursday was different. It wasn't gangster action. It was a mass insurrection. Quote, there was panic, terror. The city was under siege, close quote, says Vladimir Ramirez, a political scientist in Culiacan who, like many, has continued curfew into Friday. Quote, people slept wherever they were at. Businesses are closed. Nobody wants to go out, close quote. This change has not come overnight. It is the result of a bloody trend of cartels developing insurgent tactics over many years. The use of burning vehicles to block roads was taken from militant protesters. Cartels use it to stop the movement of troops and to put pressure on the government. The cartels have armed up with stolen military weapons and an endless stream of rifles from the United States. Between 2007 and 2018, more than 150,000 firearms seized in Mexico were traced to U.S. gun shops and factories. And cartels from the Texas border to Guadalajara have learned to protect their leaders with rings of gunmen who can cause trouble to stop their capture. Yet it was still shocking on Thursday to see how fast the cartel moved and how brazenly the gunmen stayed on the streets. Residents took dozens of photos of the armed thugs that circulated on social media, amplifying the threat. And it was almost a side note that there was a simultaneous prison break in which 51 inmates fled. Quote, the Sinaloa Cartel demonstrated a tremendous ability to mobilize rapidly and to take effective control of the city, close quote, says Raul Benitez. This person is also quoting Raul Benitez, an expert on Latin America's armed conflicts. Quote, they showed that in Sinaloa, they are the ones who run things, close quote. In contrast, the Mexican military was in shambles. Officials made contradictory and confusing statements about why the soldiers had gone to Guzman's house without enough backup. In many points in the city, the cartel gunmen went unchallenged. There were reports that the cartel had held various soldiers hostage and threatened to kill them. And in these circumstances, it was best to let the suspect go, President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador said Friday. Quote, you can't fight fire with fire. We don't want deaths. We don't want war. With justice, we will guarantee peace and tranquility in the country, close quote. Lopez Obrador won power last year in a landslide election and still enjoys high approval ratings. His decision Thursday to avoid further bloodshed earned support from some. Ramirez, the political scientist in Culiacan, says that the gunmen in Culiacan were not attacking civilians, but the menace was clear, and they could have unleashed a bloodbath. Quote, it was a threat of terrorism, Ramirez says. Quote, the government acted with great responsibility, close quote. Others criticized Lopez Obrador for surrendering to criminals. Quote, his idea of peace and love doesn't work. He is making the cartel stronger, Benitez says. Quote, I don't even know what his strategy is, close quote. The worry now is that the Mexican government's decision to release Guzman sets a precedent. If other traffickers are arrested, their cohorts could kidnap people to demand their release. It also raises the specter of the cartel appearing more powerful than the army, which could have implications for governability. There has long been an image of traffickers as rebels, and some in Sinaloa call them, quote, valientes, or brave ones. Now it appears like these rebels are almost in control. This support for drug traffickers is reflected in songs known as narcocorridos, or drug ballads, that celebrate their exploits. Following Thursday's carnage, various songwriters quickly penned brand new lyrics about Ovidio Guzman and posted their verses online. Quote, rumors are heard they are taking Ovidio Guzman. In the moment there are mobilizations. A singer croons in one. Open quote, the Señor, they won't take him prisoner. There is war, and we're going to fight. Close quote. That by either Joan or Joan, it must be Joan. Grillo from Time magazine. So both of those are pretty square sources, but still. Now, this is also a conservative paper. I don't know why I'm reading from conservative papers right now, but it just happened, and I kind of want to get a picture of it. Often what I'll do is, even if I know what I'm reading is biased, because all of it is nowadays. That's the world we live in. I can at least get a picture of what it looks like from the bias. It reminds me of watching these football games and these basketball games that now feel as though they're so clearly fixed by bad calls and so on, and wondering how to negotiate who they want to win and how. Okay, so this one is by Kate Linthicum, Linthicum. It's like Linthicum, but with a TH instead of a C. Kate Linthicum. And this was published a day later, so it's slightly more analytical in nature. The cartel gunmen who seized control of the Mexican city of Culiacan on Thursday made two things clear. The Sinaloa Cartel is stronger than ever, and bringing peace to Mexico is going to take more than bringing down one man. It was just months ago that American officials were celebrating the conviction of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman on trafficking and murder charges as a crucial turning point in the war on drugs and Mexican organized crime. Quote, the impact cannot be overstated, close quote, U.S. Attorney Ariana Fajardo Orchan said in July after the notorious Sinaloa leader was sentenced in a New York court to life in prison. But Guzman's capture hasn't weakened the Sinaloa Cartel, which continues to send millions of dollars of drugs to the United States each month, and which on Thursday artfully outmuscled Mexican federal forces to take control of one of the country's largest cities. Ha! The Sinaloa Cartel artfully outmuscled Mexican federal forces to take control of one of the country's largest cities. Cartel fighters converged on the northern city of Culiacan by the hundreds Thursday afternoon after 30 Mexican soldiers and National Guard members captured Guzman's 28-year-old son, Ovidio Guzman Lopez, who has taken on a leadership role since his father's arrest. No mention in this piece or the previous piece about Ivan. I think the leadership role is more the elder brother. This was the sort of feeling I got, who escaped arrest and is not talked about. This is what I'm talking about. Not when you can see between the lines what's missing and why, then you know more about the writer, don't you? And who they're talking to and why. But okay, so they're calling this Ovidio has taken on a leadership role since his father's arrest. Fighters surrounded the house where the younger Guzman was being held, taking 8 Mexican security officers hostage. They simultaneously laid siege to other parts of the city of 1 million people. It's a city of 1 million people, folks, attacking the state prosecutor's office and blocking roads into town with burning vehicles. After 4 hours, Mexican authorities gave up. They freed Guzman and retreated, a decision made, quote, with the goal of safeguarding the well-being and tranquility of Culiacan, close quote, according to Mexican Security Secretary Alfonso Durazo. The dramatic show of force demonstrated the continued dominance of drug traffickers in the region and also showed that Sinaloa and other cartels are more complex than authorities often suggest. Law enforcement officials and the media alike had long portrayed El Chapo as Mexico's public enemy number one, a narco godfather and an all-powerful fugitive who for years topped the Drug Enforcement Agency's most wanted list. With his profitable drug smuggling empire and 2 daring escapes from Mexican prisons, Guzman was worth billions of dollars and clearly wielded wide influence. But many experts maintain that Guzman was never the sole head of the Sinaloa cartel and was rather the leader of one powerful faction within the group. There are other Sinaloa leaders, all with their own army of armed guards and their own suppliers and clients in the United States, said Miguel Angel Vega, a journalist who has been covering drug traffickers in Culiacan for 15 years. Quote, most people believe El Chapo was the only one running the show, but this city is filled with drug lords. We have 20 El Chapos here. Close quote. Sinaloa members do not refer to themselves as a cartel, but rather as a federation of families, most of whom come from the Golden Triangle, a mountain region where the states of Sinaloa, Chihuahua, and Durango converge. After Guzman was extradited to the United States in early 2017, there were struggles between a faction headed by Damaso Lopez, known as El Licenciado, the graduate, and Guzman's sons. But the sons won, and Lopez was arrested that year, Damaso Lopez. So the connection between the authority when they want one of their own removed is clear there, isn't it? The sons won, and Lopez was arrested that year. Since then, there seems to have been peace among the factions. And as Thursday's events made clear, they can unite at a moment's notice to defend against a common enemy. Wow. Everard Mead, a professor at the University of San Diego who has worked extensively in Culiacan, said the idea that jailing El Chapo would help solve Mexico's security crisis was a fiction embraced primarily by U.S. authorities. Nobody in Mexico was under the illusion that it was going to make much of a dent in the organized crime world in any substantial way, close quote. Nobody in Mexico was under the illusion that it was going to make much of a dent in the organized crime world in any substantial way. Quote, this is not a vertically integrated organization where everybody has the same uniform, close quote, he said of the Sinaloa Cartel. Quote, it's much more flexible than that, and it always has been, close quote. In other parts of Mexico, the government's so-called kingpin strategy of targeting cartel leaders has led to more disruption than has the arrest of Guzman. But while various factions may battle for supremacy, generally they just morph into new groups and continue to engage in the same criminal enterprises. At this point, Vega said, targeting leaders is a pointless exercise. Quote, they get one drug lord and then another, and it's like an endless story, close quote, he said. Mexican President Andres Manuel López Obrador, who took office in December, appeared to agree on that point. He criticized his predecessors for waging a war on cartels and said that addressing poverty is better than a militarized approach. Yet in practice, he has mostly continued that military approach, sending armed federal forces to hotspots around the country. Those forces appeared to be employing the kingpin strategy when they sought to detain Ovidio Guzman. The president said he supported the move to free Ovidio because, quote, violence cannot be confronted with violence, and, quote, the capture of one criminal cannot be worth more than the lives of people. One criminal is how they translate it here. We heard that same quote, but one delinquent was the quote, right? On Saturday, López Obrador said he received a phone call from President Trump, who expressed his, quote, solidarity, unquote, with Mexico after the events in Culiacan. López Obrador's statements left an impression among some here that Mexico lacks a coherent security plan, a worrying sign given other recent explosions of violence, including the killing of 14 police officers in the Michoacan state on Monday. Many demanded more answers from the government. Quote, we should see resignations and changes in strategy, tweeted Adrian Lopez, the director of the Sinaloa-based Northwest newspaper. Columnist Hector de Mauleon said on Twitter that Mexicans will remember Thursday's chaos in Culiacan as a turning point for López Obrador's administration. Quote, let's save this date, the day the Mexican state was overpowered and humiliated by organized crime, he said. Quote, in the meantime, the narcos are celebrating in Culiacan, close quote. So a couple of conservative sort of sources on that and the Times, but that gives us an interesting picture. And it also brings up how we talk about dealing with, if we talk about it dealing with it in an authoritarian way, like we should send a bunch of military and cops in there and just kill all those guys. That's clearly not a solution, nor is coddling them. So somewhere between that lies a policy. And I have a strong feeling that a pacifist policy here would work far better than a militant policy. And as a pacifist, these are the kind of spaces where it's interesting to ask oneself, how can we intervene and mediate more sensibly with these prideful families and this clunky government? This could apply anywhere. What if in Oregon, Portland's a pretty big city, right? What if in a city like Oregon or Seattle or someplace up there in the Northwest, these groups, these roaming groups of armed men who took that place last year, was it 2 years ago? Just decided, all right, you try to arrest one of ours and we're going to get guns, blow up cars to block the streets. We're going to have a calculated plan. A bunch of us are going to group together on a moment's notice and we're going to occupy this place until you're embarrassed. Well, we would send in the National Guard and we would, although I don't know, maybe Trump wouldn't because he likes white supremacists so much. Maybe he'd say, we're just going to let, there's good people and bad people on both sides, what he would say, right? But it makes you wonder. So that's what happened in Culiacan, roughly, as based on the translation of some writers from here, El Norteño in the United States. And I encourage you to look into it, learn more about it. And I guess that's going to do it for today. We can go out with more music if you want. Nah, we're at nearly the 30-minute mark, and it'd be nice to stop right on the button, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be a pleasant thing? This thing has a double stoppage, so that's why it's tricky. You have to do it twice. It always makes you hang around a little bit at the end. So what you should do is like a frozen face like this. Okay, great to see you.